Hey guys, this is Cori from Redefining Strength. Welcome to the Fitness Hacks Podcast. This is the show where I share all my free workout and nutrition tips. I'm not going to ever fill this episode with sponsorships or ask you to buy anything. All I ask in return is if you're enjoying the podcast to leave a review or leave a 5-star rating. Or even better, share it with someone you think it might help. This will only take a few minutes and would mean the world to me and possibly change the life of someone you know. So let's jump right in. We often think about shifting our habits, our diet, our workouts when we have a new goal we're working towards, but we also have to remember that we might need to shift it over the course of our year. It's not just when our goals change, when our body changes as we get older, but every season might require a slightly different lifestyle balance. And that's why I'm super excited to dive into how we can adjust our fall routine specifically in this case, but our routines in general over the course of the year to really meet us where we're at with my fabulous dietitian, Brooke. So Brooke, welcome and thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
So let's talk about shifting those habits with the seasons. Why is this so important and where can it even add value if we are finding that we're working towards our goals and maybe things are becoming stale or it feels like something's just not sort of matching what we need right now?
Absolutely. I love this topic. So seasonal shift, depending on where you are in the country, like the seasons are starting to change, right? Like next week is September, which is literally insane to be thinking about, like Halloween, then Thanksgiving, then Christmas. So the seasons are changing, which honestly for me is so sad. I'm in Kentucky and last week it was in the 50s and 60s. This week it's a little bit hotter, but as the seasons start to shift and change, I really want us to think about what our routines look like, right? As we exit out of summer, as we exit out of May, June, July, August, these hotter months, what are our routines going to look like headed into fall? Because I think with working with a lot of clients, I have seen this, and I even see this in my own life. It can become a big struggle headed into the quote unquote colder months to follow our routines that we had throughout the summer, right? It's much more motivating to go outside and get in a lift or get in a walk when it's hot outside and it's sunny and it's nice. And it's like, oh, this is so great. I'm getting a tan while I'm lifting or on my walk. But oftentimes when we head into the colder months, it can become really difficult to continue on with the same routines and the same habits that you once had throughout the summer. So I really love this topic solely for the purpose of, I think it's important to really dive into not creating new routines necessarily for the colder months, but what can you do differently and what do you need to shift and adjust and change that might look a little bit different than what you did during the warmer months. So like even for me, as we head into the colder months, like seasonal depression is a real thing. Like when it gets cold outside, all jokes aside, like it can become really difficult to get motivated and stay disciplined. And oftentimes I see that's when we start to fall off our habits, our consistencies, our routines. So I really want to start being proactive, right? The last week of August headed into September. What can we do these last couple months of 2024 to really, really hone in on our goals and get to our goals and get to that end result and get to see that progress that we want to see without kind of just slipping into that old habit of, oh, it's getting colder. Like, that's okay. Maybe my workouts will decrease. My nutrition's going to look a little bit differently, but get out of that headspace and really get ourselves motivated to finish out the year strong.
It's owning our reality and owning the evolution of it. And you hit on something that's so key. It's a pattern we've often repeated, even whether or not we're aware of it. We try and force a habit mold on ourselves that worked at one time of year on another. And I mean, I 100% agree. I even said to Ryan this morning, I'm like, oh, it's already getting darker when we're supposed to be getting up and walking the dogs, and it makes it so much harder to get out of bed. And in owning that, like our habits over the months where it's darker earlier do change. And the more we've owned that and adjust for it, the better off my results have been, but also the better lifestyle balance we've created. So I think this really is an opportunity to say, hey, what habits might work for next summer, but don't work for this fall or this winter or next spring? And how can I constantly evolve over the course of the year and make 1% improvements that really do allow things to snowball over trying to force ourselves into some like ideal mold we had of habits at a different time that now doesn't fit, makes us think we just don't have the willpower, makes us fall off. Then we have the holiday habit slide even further, right? And we're starting over in January. So going off of that, what opportunities do you really see with pausing to assess right now going into the fall?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's key going off that a little bit to remember that this is for everyone. This is not for a certain population. This is not for one group of people. Like, if you are listening to this, if you're in this Facebook group, like, this is for you, right? This is for everyone, whether you're a stay-at-home mom and your kids just went back to school and you're like, yes, freedom, like I have so much time now. Or if you're a CEO of a company and you're working from sun up to sundown, like reassessing the habits that we had over the summer headed into the fall months, this is for you. So definitely don't kind of count yourself out like, oh, my fall looks the same as it did in the summer. If it does, great. How can we build off those habits? But for most of us, a lot of that consistency in habits, they change with the seasons. So one thing that I really like to do, and this is just something that I've evolved in working with clients, is what can we do headed into September, right? That's why this is so pivotal the end of August to really focus on this the last couple months. So one thing that I think is going to be really important, kind of changing up or shifting gears, if you will, with the seasons is reigniting your motivation, right? The season's going to change whether we want it to or not, right? It's something that we can't control. It's out of our control what the weather is doing outside. But what we can control is going to be really important. And a part of that is finding ways to reignite our motivation. We need to switch things up. This is very similar to like a workout routine. You're not going to stay on the same 4-week progression. You're not going to do the same workouts your entire life. Why? Because our bodies change, seasons change, life happens, things change. Same thing with the season, right? The season is going to change. You're not going to do the same thing or what you've always done if it hasn't worked for you. So I really think starting at the base and really starting there with, hey, this is out of my control, whether I like it or not. The season's going to change. How can I really reignite my motivation right now, today, headed into September, to stay on track and get me to my goals? So I think the first thing is really focusing on how can we reignite that motivation.
And this will be the case with so many different changes in life. You mentioned that maybe you don't think the seasonal shifts will apply to you, and maybe it doesn't with necessarily fall, spring, winter, but there's going to be changes in career, changes in lifestyle balance. Maybe you were single and now got married, or you had kids. There's so many different evolutions in our life that might make us need to step back and reassess. And at that point, we do have to step back and say, what will keep me motivated to keep moving forward because of the other priorities that might have come into play? And reassessing that motivation, we might find like, hey, during the fall, because of other things going into the holidays, maybe I'm not as motivated to hit my weight loss goal. Okay, so now what could I do to keep in the habits that would keep me focused on the goal ultimately, but also add more motivation to what I'm doing? Motivate me to get up out of bed when it's still dark, or maybe say, hey, if I don't have this motivation, how can I change what I'm doing to then still want to implement that habit? It's assessing the pain of staying stuck and making that outweigh the pain of change. However, you can't necessarily make that pain greater. So then you have to say, hey, how can I make the pain of change less, so to speak?
I love that. Yes, 100%. Even when you touch on like it getting colder outside and the sun starts to change, right? Like maybe you don't want to get out of bed as early and get your workout in. Great. That's okay. If it works with your schedule, how can we readjust and get that workout in later in the day? So I think definitely that motivation is going to be key, right? But when motivation fails us, what are we going to do then? So focusing on what's inside your control is going to be key here, as opposed to what is outside your control, which is the seasons changing. Another big thing that I really like to focus on with clients and myself is reevaluating what hasn't worked for us in the past. We talk about this all the time, but if you can reflect back on last year, September to December, what did you do? What did your habits look like? What did your workouts look like? What did your nutrition look like? And reevaluating what worked for you and what didn't work for you, and moving into this new fall season with new goals in alignment with your goals, right? Maybe what you did last year during the season didn't work for you. So you're going to kind of start fresh with those habits. Maybe what you did last year you loved and it worked for you. So you're going to continue to build off of that this season. But I think really reflecting is going to be a huge part in setting you up for success moving forward into these next couple months, and figuring out where you're at. Like, one, meet yourself where you're at today. Like, where are you at, right? Like, what are your goals these next couple months? And then reflecting on what's worked for you in the past and what hasn't worked and slowly starting to build off that.
I think you hit on something that's so key. It's meeting yourself where you're at and reflecting on what did and didn't work. Because I think so often we just think, oh, well, it was X plan that didn't work. And we jump to some new ideal plan instead of saying, hey, okay, this plan worked for X, Y, and Z reason. And I like these things and it didn't work for X, Y, and Z reason. So now can I think or look for some other program that has something that addresses the problems, but also still has the good points and that meets me where I'm at. Because so often we are just jumping from ideal to ideal versus truly evaluating and owning where we're at right now. And off of that, like it can be a struggle to make changes because we do get stuck on that ideal. How do you help someone embrace potentially doing a minimum or doing less than they think is perfect when a season calls for that?
Yeah, such a great question. I think, yeah, we all can learn from that question and just the reflecting off of that. So, what do you do when that motivation fails you, right? You have to start somewhere. And I know we already touched on it, but the first thing that's going to be important there is meeting yourself where you're at. Like, what is doable for you today? Is it tracking your macros and nailing your macros? Is it just increasing your water by 5 ounces, right? Start somewhere and continue to build off of that. So I think when we're looking at, hey, I'm overwhelmed, the season's very overwhelming for me. I really don't know how to set these goals in place. Well, stay tuned because we're definitely going to dive into that. But the first thing you got to do is meet yourself where you're at and focus on what you can do right now, right? Like I have this jar of water. I do struggle with water. If I don't keep a glass of water next to me throughout the day, I will not drink a thing of water. So I constantly have to remind myself to sit a glass next to me. That's a habit that I've created. I didn't start like that, right? It started by me realizing, hey, I don't drink any water and I'm sweating a lot throughout the day. So what can I do to increase that? So for you, maybe water is applicable for you because headed into the colder months, it's very easy for water to slip. If you're constantly like bundled up and freezing, what's the last thing you want to do? Drink water, right? Like that doesn't sound very nice. So focusing on those habits over time can be really key. So I think the biggest thing in a roundabout way of me saying all of this is meet yourself where you're at and focus on one thing that you can do today, whether that's starting with a protein minimum, right? Hey, I'm going to nail 15 grams of protein at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Or maybe you're along the path of already eating a lot of protein. You're like, hey, I'm going to nail 30 to 40 grams of protein at every meal. Like meet yourself where you're at and then continue to build off of that, especially headed into the colder months.
It's focusing almost less on what you can't do that maybe you've done in the past and more what you can still do consistently that is better than what you did at this same time last year. It's the 1% improvements over the seasons, over the years versus comparing it to other times of year. Because we get good at what we consistently do. And the more we create that success mindset through being successful in our actions, the more we want to do, the more motivated we stay, the more changes we ultimately make, and the more we see results snowball. We don't recognize that sometimes by trying to force an ideal that we can't maintain in a specific season, we're setting ourselves up for failure because we ultimately do less. Like I've seen it happen myself where I'll have a routine where I'm like, okay, I'm going to do 5 times a week of working out. And then I do 3 and I'm like, I only did 3. It was a failure this week. And then all of a sudden next week I'm doing even less. And then I'm falling off and I'm like, oh, I just need a break. Instead of saying, oh, well, I can only do 3. And then I did 3 and built off of that. And it's like, I still did 3 workouts either way, but it's the mindset it creates because I do think so often we don't think about what can I make myself feel successful with to want to do more of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I think a big part of that as well is just staying grounded, right? Like you said, consistency is key here, right? Consistency truly is the backbone to accelerate you forward. You've got to be consistent. But for a lot of us headed into a new season, that consistency feels all over the place, right? It's like, yes, I got my new workout progression set up for next week. I'm going to nail 6 out of the 7 days a week. And then when you lose sight of that and then you miss one and life happens and work gets busy and the kids need you, you count that as a failure. But completely reversing that and staying grounded and saying, hey, no, like that's a huge win that I worked out 4 times this week. Did I hit all 6 days? No, but that's okay, right? I can refocus and next week head into it nailing 4 to 5 workouts and just continuing to build off of that. So really staying grounded and giving yourself shout outs for those wins, because those daily wins of even adding 5 ounces of water to your day, that's a win. Like, count it as a win. And really focusing on staying grounded around that so that you can continue to build that consistency over time.
Now the question, how? How do we do all of this? How do we meet ourselves where we're at? Because there is always an excuse. Like going into fall, oh, well, it's dark outside and I just want to stay underneath the covers. It's so warm and the puppies are cuddling with me. Or in the summer, my excuse, oh, well, it's so nice outside. I just want to have a margarita and just relax. Who wants to do these things? So obviously at every time of year, we can make these excuses. So how can we really meet ourselves where we're at and address any seasonal shifts that we need? That's actually hard to say, but seasonal shifts that we need.
No, I love that. So a big thing that I want to dive into, and it was a challenge that I put out in the post on Monday, and it's something that I really want to focus on now, is creating a mantra. As silly as it sounds, creating some type of phrase or sentence that you are always going to fall back to. Like when that motivation fails you, when you don't get all your workouts in, when you don't eat how you thought you wanted to, what can we fall back to, right? And I think headed into this season, a fun way, if you will, of doing that, maybe a cliche way of doing that, is creating some type of mantra that you have written down that's on your bathroom mirror, that's on your phone screensaver, whatever it may be. You have some type of word or phrase that you always fall back to that keeps accelerating you forward. And I honestly loved reading through Monday's comments. You all have some awesome mantras that you've already been thinking through, it looked like, headed into this fall season. But a big part of, hey, where do I start with this, right? Like the season's changing. I know I need to reflect. I know I need to set new goals and habits for myself. Where do I start? I want to start with a mantra. So really setting that intention right now, today, this week, whenever you have time to sit down and you're listening to this, you're like, okay, I need to really think through this. Sit down and think through it, because I think it's going to be really important headed into these last couple months of 2024. But starting with setting that intention, take some time to reflect on what you need most. What do you need most this season? Headed into September next week, what is it that you need? Is it more self-care? Do you need more consistency in your workouts? Do you need a renewed focus on your nutrition habits? Like whatever that is for you, because it's going to be different for everyone, whatever that is for you, identify that core focus for this challenge. Like start there with that core focus, and that is how we're going to build on this mantra.
I think the mantra hits on so much more than we even realize too, in that it can help us assess the struggles we've had in the past. It can help us assess what we need as a reminder for the future, but it's tying us back to our why we really feel this is important so that we keep prioritizing it during a time where maybe other priorities have shifted slightly. I think it's also really key that you mentioned putting it somewhere you can see, because it's not just the phrase that we can remind ourselves of or even repeat to ourselves daily, as silly as it might feel to say it every morning when you wake up to sort of make sure that you're focused on the things you want to accomplish, the priorities you want to have. But I think that visual is a super key thing to highlight because it goes back to environment. Our environment triggers so many of the patterns that we repeat, good and bad. And so by changing your environment with this mantra, someplace you can see it, you're triggering a new action. You're reminding yourself of the habit. It's the same thing as putting out your clothes so that you remember to go to the gym. It's the same thing as having that water bottle out so you remember to drink the water. It's a change in environment which triggers a pattern. So as you're thinking about the mantra, think about what would trigger that pattern to be a positive thing. Think about how you've even maybe self-sabotage in the past, and think about how you can oversell the negative of those things to create a mantra that will help you move past that. But I think really focusing your intentions on your why and changing that environment is so key to helping us handle the habit changes that we might need to have even.
Absolutely. And after we identify that why, that's the base, right? If we're looking at a pyramid, the base of that pyramid, the largest part of that pyramid is your why. Like, what is your why? But when we head into fall, identify that core focus that you want to focus on for yourself, right? Maybe you have a lot going on externally. Maybe your kids need you 24/7. Maybe you're in communities that constantly just need stuff from you. how are you going to focus on you first to then go and serve and pour out on those other people? So identify that why, identify that core focus, and then start to craft your mantra, right? Like on Monday, like I said, there was a lot of comments of people already putting their mantras out there and what they want to focus on. Find what resonates with you, right? And maybe it's you taking a mantra from someone else that you loved. You're like, that's what I'm going to focus on. But really start to craft this mantra, keeping in mind that you're prioritizing yourself. Like this is for you to continually work and grow on yourself. I have a couple things that I want to throw out there, a couple mantras that I think are going to be helpful for people. I personally do like fall in terms of the cozy vibes. I don't love the weather, I'm not going to lie. So a lot of these are around cozy vibes, but some of these that I think of that I'm going to take for myself, so take it or leave it. One is harvest the best version of yourself. Find strength in the stillness. Embrace cozy, but stay active. Gratitude and growth. Harvest wellness, reap vitality. So as cheesy as those are, as funny, honestly, they'll probably make me laugh every day that I look at them. But that's okay, right? Because they go back to my why. Like, what do I need to be reminded of on a daily basis to motivate me, to accelerate me forward? Same thing for you, right? Craft your mantra around what you need to be reminded of on a daily basis to accelerate you forward, and to get towards your goals and building those routines, right? Because we can't build routines, establish consistency if we don't start with our why and crafting that mantra of going back to our core focus.
It's having the mindset in place so that we can then create the daily actions we need and have a reminder of why we're doing them and also what we're driving towards with them. So in terms of crafting those daily habits and routines, where would you recommend that someone start?
Yeah, great question. So go back to your why. So if you're sitting down right now listening to this, or you're in the car driving and you are, around a pen and paper, or you're just thinking through this, right? Like start writing it down. Like start with number one. What is my why? What's my core focus? Number two, how do I craft my mantra then, right? It goes back to that core focus. So let's say you're focused through the next month, 2 months, 3 months, the rest of the months in 2024 is to consistently hit 3 days in the gym, right? You have to start setting up that goal for yourself now in order to build off of those habits. So you have to start with your why. Maybe your why is headed into 2025. Wow. I almost said multiple numbers there. 2025, which is crazy. Maybe you are one that's like, hey, I don't want to just let these last 4 months go to waste and start the new year with all these goals. And then by February, I would have failed them, right? Maybe you're like, hey, I'm starting that resolution now so that I head into the new year totally taking grasp and grip on my goals so that I don't feel like I'm restarting the new year off like I do every year. Maybe you're going to start that right now and make that a change for yourself. So kind of taking what you would have done in the past in terms of, hey, new year, new goals, start now, new season. What are your goals, right? Where are you right now today? What is your why? And what can you do to build off of that over the next couple months?
It's thinking about those like silly, simple habits that we could do that almost take no thought. I like to think of this as like an opportunity to even strip away any fluff that I might have added to my routine that doesn't necessarily need to be there. That while good may be a 1% improvement, also adds more willpower that I'm using or more energy that I'm expending or more mental space. So I like to think of this as a chance to say, hey, how can I strip things back to those basics, make sure that I'm really good at those basics again, and then build off of it from there based on what the season allows. Because I do think a lot of times we start adding in more as we go through, and then we hit this point of overwhelm because we've been chasing new things, which isn't bad. It's potentially even why we've seen results happen. But we get distracted and we feel like we have to do all these things when really, if we go back to those basics, we can at least maintain our results, which might need to be our focus for that time of year. And then from there, build towards whatever other goal we set. But I think it is taking this opportunity to strip away some of those things, go back to your why, go back to the habits that matter, even assessing previous year habits to say, hey, what did and didn't work, as you mentioned, and then say, hey, how can this now build into the new year so that I don't feel like I'm starting over? Because that is the key. In life, there is no starting over, right? We're just moving forward. So we've got to find a way to keep building and assessing what we need right now. Now, all this is all well and good, right? We put the habits in place. We have our why. But knowing isn't doing. Having that plan isn't actually implementing it. How can we get ourselves to do all the things that we need when sometimes it's a little bit harder and priorities have shifted and excuses are popping up? While valid, there are always excuses, but how do we overcome those things?
I love that. And I think that's huge because we can sit down and talk about goals and be motivational all day long, but the implementation, if that's not there, it means nothing. Essentially, right? You can have all the knowledge in the world, but if you're not doing it, what's the purpose? What's the point? So, really taking time, yes, to set a game plan, right? You need those action steps. You need that game plan. That's key. But now we're in this phase. It's like, okay, now you've set your mantra, hopefully. You have your why, you have your core focus. Now, what are you going to do with that, right? That implementation can be hard for a lot of people, including myself. I can't tell you how many times I've headed into the colder months being like, 6 a.m., I'm getting my workout in. I'm going to get up and get it in before the sun comes up. Like, come on, Brooke, let's do it. And then what happens at 6 a.m.? It's cold. The sheets feel nice. I feel cozy. I feel warm. And I don't want to get up because my warm up's going to take longer because I'm cold. I'm prone to make excuses. So I could make all the excuses in the world. But again, if that implementation isn't there, it means nothing. So one thing that I highly recommend is something called like a daily check-in, right? So ending the day reflecting. Oftentimes reflection, we learn more through reflection than we do through the actual process. So I'm a big believer in reflecting on things. So something that I always recommend to clients is a daily check-in. And for those in our coaching program, you get a lot of check-ins with our coaches, with myself. Like, you are constantly being asked, how are you feeling? How did your goals go today? Which is so key. So that accountability can be huge. But oftentimes, if you feel like you don't have that accountability, what can you do to really make sure that implementation step is being executed? And it's really a daily check-in. So going back to yourself at the end of every day and be like, how did the day go, right? How did the routines go today? How did my workout go today? Did I get in a walk? How did my nutrition feel? Like, how do I feel overall mentally? Did I enjoy the day? Did I have energy? Like, there's so many reflection questions that we could dive into, but the biggest thing here is just that you reflect. And if you feel like, hey, the day did not go as planned, I didn't get my workout in, life got busy, set yourself up for success the following day. That's the power of checking in at the end of every day. Is maybe you crushed it. Maybe you had the best day ever. Great. How can you repeat that? Or maybe you didn't have a good day, like I said. How can you set yourself up for success that following day? So really, those check-ins and accountability and having a coach can be extremely pivotal in the next couple months and honestly throughout life. But really, that daily check-in is going to be key.
Reflection helps us take ownership. And I think that's such a key thing to remember. It's not condemning yourself if something didn't go right. It's not even praising yourself if something did go right, although you definitely should. But it's just helping you take ownership of your reality. And I think that's what it comes back to with meeting yourself where you're at, shifting with the seasons. It's all about ownership of your reality, because in reflecting on what you did and how it worked out, you can see things that maybe you're not embracing fully. And so they might not feel sustainable right now, but they ultimately are needed. They are a sacrifice, a cost to get the reward that you want. So you have to own that you have to find ways to embrace the changes. Or you might say, hey, this is a habit or routine that I'm forcing on myself that simply is not realistic for me. I am not taking ownership of who and what I am and owning my reality. And I can tell you right now off of that, the reason I thought of this was because I know there is no way in the winter I am getting up at 6 a.m. and going to work out. Not going to happen. I will set myself up for failure. However, I know during warmer seasons, I am ready to get up, get out of bed, and get going. And so right there, I could say, oh, well, is this something that I'm just not embracing the sacrifice to get the reward? Or is there something I can own in my lifestyle, my reality, that can make it something I need to adjust, right? Okay, I'm going to shift my workout to later in the day and try that. Okay, is it not really the timing? Is it just that, other priorities are creeping in? Is this now a suck I have to embrace? As I like to say, embrace the suck. Or did switching the time actually help because I own my reality? So that reflection allows us to determine, is this a sacrifice we need to make and we need to own the hard? Or is this something we're trying to force that really is just draining our willpower and not sustainable and not going to move us forward because it's not matching where we're at right now?
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. Embrace the suck is a huge one. And oftentimes, I mean, even in just coaching clients, it goes back to One, do you have the time in the day to complete the things that you want to do? Because that's honestly one of the biggest excuses that I hear often is, well, there's not enough time, right? Like if I don't want to get up at 6 a.m. to get my workout done because it's cold, well, I need to do it later in the day. Well, I don't have time. And often I go back and ask a question of like, hey, almost all of us have the time in the day, but how are you actually managing your time? And that's pushy, but honestly, it's something that I often reflect on because I can be prone to that. I don't have enough time in the day. I don't have time to go meal prep. I don't have enough time to go do my workout in. Okay, well, let's look at your schedule. What do you have time for? And oftentimes, a part of that, yes, embrace the suck. Maybe you have to do a 6 a.m. workout. And yeah, that sucks, but at least you're getting to your goals, right? That's all that matters. But a big part of it is also just, hey, let's look at the schedule. Let's look at how much time we do have in the day. How can we better manage the time to get in the things that you truly want to prioritize? Because if it's a priority for you, you're going to find time to fit it in over anything. So honestly, overall, as we think about like headed into new seasons, creating these mantras, please throw your mantras in the comment section so we can go through them. Honestly, I'll probably steal some of them for myself because mine were pretty cheesy. But overall, like really focus on your mantra. Go back to your why. What's your core focus? And then really write out the things that you want to get out of this next season. Maybe it's, hey, I don't want last season to become this season. I want it to be different. Okay, well, how do you want it to be different? What do you want that to look like for yourself? And slowly start to write down the things that you want to change and the goals that you have, and continue to build those habits, continue to build that consistency. Reflect on them daily so you can build them. But please throw your mantras in the comments as well, just so we can continue to empower and build each other up as we head into these next couple months.
With all of this, I have to admit, I was thinking about my own, and someone actually asked in like the unicorn group about like what you needed to hear this week. And one of the things I've been telling myself with this new season is obstacle or opportunity, you decide. And I bring this up right now too, not only to share what I'm sort of keeping as my focus, but also because as you're shifting habits, there's always pushback. There's always a pain to change. And as I mentioned, you can't change the pain of staying stuck at times to make you more motivated to want to conquer some of the challenges that you're going to face and the changes you're going to face, but you can always change that pain of change. Maybe you have to work out at that 6 a.m. despite saying this really doesn't feel good for me, but I just know I won't get it in at other times. And maybe you say, hey, this is too hard right now in this form. So maybe you shorten your workouts, or you do slightly different workouts, or you work out from home because it's too much to go to the gym. Find different ways to meet yourself where you're at while working within the parameters that you have, but also see that you always have a choice in how you choose to perceive the things that you're faced with. They can be obstacles or opportunities. The choice is really yours. You just have to step back. And I say this as someone who is very stubborn, has a hard time sometimes pausing their brain, but the more we do reflect, the more we can always be moving forward and meeting ourselves where we're at. Brooke, thank you so much for joining me today. I can't wait to see all the different mantras. Make sure to share yours, guys. Really looking forward to how you're shifting with the seasons. Thanks for listening to the Fitness Hacks podcast. Again, this is the place where I share all my free workout and nutrition tips. I'm never going to run sponsorships or ask you to buy anything. All I ask in return is if you're enjoying the podcast to leave a rating or review or share it with someone you think it might help. This will only take a few minutes, and it would mean the world to me and possibly change the life of someone you know.